Well, welcome everyone. We're so fortunate today to have Professor Ann Emmsley lead a discussion on starting a home garden. This is part of our Mālama series that we're having. And so thank you so much, Ann, for teaching us about the home garden.
All right, here we go. Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to do a couple screen shares, okay? And just a little bit of a heads up that, you know, I'm under a lot of pressure here with home gardening because I just want you to know, like, I've taught home gardening multiple times, you know, for a whole semester, but mostly I come from a commercial market garden perspective. So sometimes it's hard to flip that switch into home gardening. And also you might ask me about some concoction that your neighbor uses to control some pest. And it's not that you can't do it in the home garden, but I'm not going to endorse it because it's not legal. So, you know, I kind of come from that perspective. So keep that in mind. What I'm going to do is, that's a kind of a big topic, is I kind of broke it up into these parts. And I guess I'll stop periodically and ask for questions and then move on and try to watch my time so that we have time for questions too at the end. So if you don't have a chance, I think Joyce is going to look at the chats for questions, but you can stop me too. So the first thing I wanted to do was go to resources. So I'm going to share my screen with, so give me a second here. Do a screen share. I'm going to show you, because I mean, we already had some questions. I guess I got to go. Oh, shucks, it's not showing up. I got to go to my CTAR screen. There we go. Okay, so I want to point out, first of all, the CTAR, College of Tropical Ag and Human Resources, so CTAHR. If you have questions, I always tell my students to come here first because it's Hawaii-centric. And, you know, we have a few differences from the mainland. So I'm going to point out two links here. First of all is publications. So I'm going to click on publications just to show you. And so you can either, you know, put in something like hydroponic lettuce, search publications, you're going to get a list, okay? Or, and hopefully you're still seeing this screen, or you can browse by general category. So home garden, yeah, there's different things for home gardeners. So that's a great link. I use this all the time. And then going back, the other important link is this outreach and extension. They also have things on home gardening. And they also have, very importantly, if I'm not mistaken, the seed lab in here. I might be mistaken. I have a link for the seed lab. So you can also get to the seed lab. It's hard to get there. How do I order fruits and vegetable seeds? So somebody earlier was asking Joyce about seeds. I think Joyce got some seeds from the Master Gardeners, but you can order online from the seed lab. And they have home garden packets, and they're really affordable. Now, some stuff is out of stock, but they also have a lot of other things. And many of these seeds are adapted to Hawaii. So I wanted to share that. So CTAHR, write that down. Okay, I'm going to go back to my topics. So you can see some of the links there, but just do the seed lab. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with Zoom even after all this time. And then seed suppliers. I mean, there's a bunch of seed suppliers right now. Many of them are not like Johnny's, where we get a lot of our commercial seed from, which is a little more expensive maybe than some of the other sites. You know, they're not even supplying home gardeners right now, but some of these other ones might be. And stuff is out of stock. Everybody's going crazy and becoming home gardeners, which is awesome. But just be patient. We don't have a narrow window like the mainland, and so you can always pick up stuff as we move into fall. They'll be getting new seed in, and you can do it then. So there's different places you can get seed. There's also the Seed Savers Alliance, I think, for Hawaii. And so there's multiple places to get seed. Okay, I want to talk about gardening styles. The other thing about home gardening is there's a lot of ways to skin the cat. There's no one way to do it. So I don't have any magical formula that's going to make anybody be successful. It's like, it's personal, you know, situations and choices. And so just because I tell you one way, it doesn't mean there's not another way to do it. There's many, many ways to do it. Do whatever works with your situation and whatever you found works for you, because you have to do a little bit of stuff, experimenting, just try things out. If they work, they work. If they fail, just do something different. And we always have failures too. Like even in our market, we always, one year the eggplants just crash and the next year we have eggplants. So a failure doesn't mean it's a failure forever. Okay, so traditionally we would do things in rows. At my house, we do things in rows because we use drip irrigation, and you almost have to, like how you might traditionally see a garden. A lot of people, some people like to do raised beds, like you see in this picture here. And that would be where you'd make some kind of structure, and you can even put them up higher. You want to make this as deep as possible. And they bring in outside soil and compost to make those. They're easy to reach, maybe easier to, manipulate the soil. You're going to buy potting mix and compost to mix that in, and maybe some perlite. But of course, that's an extra structure you have to do. I'm going to talk more about square foot gardening. I'm going to use that as my style. I'm going to discuss. And then a lot of people in CTAR just had a series, I don't know if you saw in some of those things, about container gardening. So for some of us, maybe we just have a lanai or we don't want to disturb our yard. You can do container gardening. I think the biggest thing is you want to use potting mix, perlite. You can mix compost in there, but not too much because it gets too heavy. The big thing about containers is you kind of have a catch, and the same thing is for a raised bed as well, because in a sense you're doing a big container. Is the catch-22 is you need to retain water because the roots only have that small area to suck moisture up, but you also need good drainage because roots also need air to breathe. So deeper is better. And the bigger container you can have that makes sense is better. And like in this case, they use 5-gallon buckets, but make sure you have drainage holes in there. So if it's on your lanai, you're gonna have to drain into something, and you don't want the pot sitting in water. So prop them up on a couple chopsticks or something like that so that they can drain. The other thing in container gardening is you are likely to need to water like daily. And if it's on a hot, sunny porch, maybe even twice a day as they get bigger. They're going to use up all the water in that container. And then second is there's varieties, particularly for the bigger stuff like tomatoes and things like that. There are container, in fact, there's been a big push. There are container type varieties that stay small and can adapt themselves to a pot. So look for those for your bigger things like peppers and eggplants and tomatoes. They're what they call patio varieties. So look for those. I'm going to talk about square foot gardening. This is something we do with our class, our Ag 200 class that we do some home gardening with. Why I like this style is like I lived in a condo at one time, and you have just a really small yard and you think, I don't have enough room for a garden, but you can actually get a lot out of a fairly small space. And the other thing I noticed we have in Hawaii is gardening fatigue. Is because we can grow year round, you kind of get sick of it actually. On the mainland, it gets cold and then you're excited to get out in your garden, and by the time you're kind of sick of it, it ends, you know? So it's hard to maintain a garden year round, and you don't have to. Just do it when you want to. And don't feel bad. You can fallow this area for a few months when you get tired of it or you go on vacation, whatever. And so an easy way to do that is just have a 4x4 space. So it's 4 feet by 4 feet. And then each of these, you get 4 1-foot square plots. And so you have 16 plots that you treat individually. And you can have a trellis at one side. And if you have a trellis at one side, on these plots, you're going to put things like tomatoes, pole beans, cucumbers, that sort of thing that crawl. And you can put these on the trellis side. And then you can do these in multiples, you know, and have a pathway if you want more. The idea behind this is it's 4 feet because you can reach 2 feet across. So you never step in this area once you mulch it up or fluff it up and get it ready. You have your pathways around, and you can keep those heavily mulched. And then some stuff like a cabbage or a broccoli or a pepper or an eggplant takes up a whole space, takes up a whole 1 foot space. Other things like green onions, you could put 16 green onions in there, 16 radishes. Something like a pak choy, you can put 4 in a 1 foot space. Something like bush beans, you can put 9. So you block these out into spaces. And so what you're getting is maximum production in a small area. You're trying to maximize the production. And then when, let's say we had lettuce here, when you cut that out, you just redo this square into something else. And so you treat each square different, you know, so you're always replanting where you're done. And then if you grow something slow, like a green pepper, you can actually add some lettuce or radishes around the outside of that and kind of double crop it at once. And, you know, you can mulch this and keep it, it's easy to weed because it's small. It's easy to abandon for a little while because it's small, and just cover it with mulch or tarp or something. And then when you want to come back to it, and you can add, if you go, wow, I want to have corn, you can add another one, and you know, you'd have 16 corn plants in there. So 4 meals for your family of 4. And so we like this style. It's easier to hand water it. It doesn't take that long to hand water it because it's a small space. You want to put it, you know, you can keep it fairly attractive so it doesn't get super weedy like a bunch of rows. It's a little, if you could also put it on automatic irrigation with some kind of sprinkler system. Okay, so that's called square foot gardening. It's just a style I like to promote to keep things small and manageable until you really get into it. And you can add multiple squares on that. So any question on styles? All right. Soil and amendments. A lot of people feel like, well, what kind of soil? I get that question. What kind of soil do I need? I said, well, you just have to use what you got. I'm a dirt farmer. I'm not a container grower, quite frankly. I'm what I call a dirt farmer. And whatever you got, that's what you got. We pull out a lot of stuff out of the sand in Kahului, right there at campus. We shouldn't be able to grow anything there. It's practically on the beach, but we do it. Okay, so you can grow anything almost anywhere. The main thing you want to do, you don't want to replace your soil. You want to add organic matter. So whether that's grass clippings, compost, manure, whatever it might be, you want to continually add organic matter. That's the secret. And that's the beauty of doing a small space too. You'll improve your soil over time. It takes time, but it'll get better. The other thing we want to always consider is try to mulch. You know, so use your grass clippings or whatever you might have and try to mulch as much as you can, because soil likes to be covered. It prevents a lot of problems. It keeps it cooler, reduces water loss. And if it's an organic mulch like grass clippings, you know, your banana leaves, whatever you might have, that'll get broken down into the soil eventually. In regenerative agriculture side, we always want to have living roots in the soil. So let's say you got tired of gardening, or you felt like it was, you know, we would put in a cover crop, and you could actually do that in your garden. Roots feed the organisms that are in the soil that help move nutrients through. So plants actually actively feed microorganisms. So having stuff growing in there all the time might not be so possible in the home garden. And then time. These things take time for the soil to improve, so don't be discouraged. There's no magic bullet. A lot of us, you may have very poor soils, especially at your house, because you don't have soil, because they took the topsoil away when they manipulated your yard. And so you have subsoil, so it may be very bad to start with. But if you just keep adding organic matter, it'll get better over time. Don't bring in soil from elsewhere unless it's absolutely necessary, because there's a good chance you're going to get nematodes, maybe nutsedge, or some weed you never had. I'm really against bringing soil from elsewhere. So just add organic matter. Spend your money on compost. And then you don't want to till too much. You know, a lot of people just take a broad fork and just fluff it up. You might have to till at the beginning, but if you can minimize your tillage, you bring up weed seeds every time you till, and you destroy the soil structure. And then, you know, don't try to step as little as possible on where you grow. Compaction is the enemy, as we say. So you want to avoid that. That's the tricks with soil. So any questions on soil?
There was one question, Anne, about how much of one thing goes in the space, but I believe that you answered that question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it depends on the size of the plant, how much goes in each area. And so if it's a small plant, you might put, you know, 6, and something like a pak choi or a lettuce, you do 4, and something like a broccoli, you just do 1. And you can experiment. They get pretty, like let's say you put pak choi in that, you know, 4 pak chois in a foot, they'll get very crowded. So the idea is, you know, you pick some of them a little bit younger, you know, to eat that one day, because you're a home gardener. You don't need 4 pak chois at once, right? You pick one as they start getting crowded, and then you pick the next one. And so you kind of spreading out your harvest maybe over 4 weeks. So you give stuff a little space. So you can always take stuff out. You know, lettuce, you can eat it small, and then let the other ones grow. So that's the other cool thing about square foot gardening.
And then another thing is that they're hoping that you can forward the PowerPoint, as well as this session is being recorded.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can send it to you. And you can post it wherever it gets posted. A few other things about soil fertility. As far as soil fertility itself, you know, you can go get a soil test as a point in time, but most of us as home gardeners don't bother. You know, as much as you can, add compost or other organic matter, put back your crop residue. And as far as how fertilizer works, this number up here, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are the macronutrients. But there are other nutrients sometimes we're in short supply of, like calcium, magnesium, sulfur, and then the micronutrients like iron, zinc. You know, there's a lot of organic materials for nitrogen, blood meal, fish emulsion, anything manure-based, like this Nutri-Rich that we use sometimes. It's a, you know, organic. It's basically based on chicken manure they've refined. There's rock-based materials for organic, like azomite or something like that. You can even get ground up rock here. That's going to release very slowly. Whoops. And then there's plant-based materials like kelp. And then we have, quote, synthetic fertilizers. Miracle-Gro works great. It's a miracle. It's got everything in it at the right. So you can use a hose on and just liquid feed your plants. And there's also slow release materials as well as regular fast release. And sometimes those work really well, like Osmocote or something like that. A lot of times people get concerned about pH. You always hear about pH, 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 pH. And one of the things I want to caution you is on the mainland, you might read a mainland gardening thing. It says, add lime. Don't do it. I've taught soils for a long time and had a lot of people bring in soil samples from all over the islands. And it's very rare we get a soil sample that needs lime to change the pH. On our sandy soils, wait, hang on just a second. Wait, Ene. On our sandy soils, in drier parts of the island, you're likely to have a fairly high pH. In a sandy soil, it might be 8. So that is actually metals dissolve in acids. So iron, zinc, copper, all of those micronutrients. So you tend to get micronutrient deficiencies. That's one of the issues we have here in Kahului. And so you're going to have a problem with high pH. So if you add lime, you're just going to make it worse. Actually, the sand in Hawaii is coral, and it's actually lime. So definitely don't add lime there. Drier parts of the island are going to be near neutral, between 6 and 7. The only place you might have an acid soil where you might need to add lime would be if you're on old pineapple land, or you're in a like Kapalua up high, something like that. It's easy to get a pH test. So generally, you could add a little bit of lime, unless you're in a sandy soil, don't do it, or even a dry part of the island, but just as a nutrient. A lot of people will add, and then you might a little bit of dolomite. A lot of people add gypsum instead, and that provides sulfur and calcium, and it doesn't change your pH. And then sometimes some Epsom salts to a light amount of Epsom salts to add magnesium and sulfur. So don't worry too much about your pH per se. pH is only important in allowing nutrients to be available. So yes.
There was a question about adding bag soil like Miracle Grow or Whitney Farms bed mix to help the soil. Is that something you might consider?
In a raised bed, if it was just regular soil, I would go with just straight compost. Bag compost, you can get bag compost, but I wouldn't, I mean, it'll help the soil because it's peat, basically. It's peat mix, but it's probably a little more expensive. I'd put my money with just straight compost directly in the soil. If you're doing a raised bed, yes.
And someone asked about eggshells and used coffee grinds, as well as organic Miracle Grow. Is there such a thing?
Yes, there is. I guess there's organic Miracle Grow. It's probably great, easy to liquid feed, gives your plants everything they need. And then eggshells provides calcium slowly, so that works. And I forget what coffee grinds does. So yeah, I mean, I'm not a major composter. I like to just throw it out there on the field. So I'm a lazy composter and let the soil do the work. But yeah, almost any organic matter works good. I forget what coffee grinds is supposed to do.
And one other thing is it safe to use compost with biosolids for gardening food?
Well, I do it all the time. So I would say yes, but a lot of people don't like to. If you're certified organic, you can. Of course, you're a home gardener, so that doesn't matter. And it's not so much the biosolids, it's like, whatever people pour down their sink. What you could do, because that's the cheapest stuff and plants love it. It's great in the landscape. If you're a little leery about using it in food, what you could do is till it in a little bit before you plant. But yeah, I mean, we use it. I use it at home, I should say, a lot. So, but some people, the leafy greens, maybe you want to avoid using it on your leafy greens. But it's been composted. I've seen all the readouts. It has to be tested because it's a commercial product. And it gets up to 130 degrees. So as far as pathogens. It's pretty pathogen free. And then we don't have a lot of heavy metals. We don't have a lot of manufacturing. So our biosolids are safer than they are in a lot of places on the mainland. But that's a personal choice. Yeah.
Another question is that people have a lot of questions. Are there any soil mixes that are dangerous for animals, such as cats? And they're talking about like Maui EKO compost.
Yeah, eco compost is the biosolids. You know, and I just say, well, if you aren't comfortable with using eco compost, just don't. I don't know, my cats are fine. I don't know about, can't imagine that any commercial mix would be dangerous for animals that I know of. Obviously, ingesting stuff that they wouldn't normally eat maybe isn't good for them, but not that I know of. Yeah, so, you know, and that's the beauty of being a home gardener. You can use materials that you feel comfortable with. So good questions. Any other questions about soil fertility? It's a complicated thing, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Just, you know, if your plants look yellow, if you want to be organic, I would say a liquid feed of organic Miracle-Gro is a good, you know, pick me up if whatever you mixed in the soil wasn't good enough. And your soil will get better and better over time if you keep adding organic matter, even as a mulch on top, and just keep mulching it, and that breaks down. You get more worms and all the fungi and bacteria in your soil. That'll help. Okay, just a couple things about site selection. Vegetables and herbs are full sun animals, so they need full sun. So really putting your garden on the north side next to the wall of your house is not a place for that. So they need full sun. It doesn't necessarily mean like for a patio, sometimes they need a little bit of shade at the hottest time of the day, but for the most part, they need 8 hours of full sun. So they can get a little shade morning, afternoon, but you want to have a full sun place. And then vegetables don't like, you know, howling winds. So if you're in a windy place, you might need some kind of windbreak. And that can be something simple like a row of sorghum, or, you know, you can put a couple stakes in weed mat or shade cloth or whatever you have on hand, you know, just to kind of protect them from the wind if you're in a really windy place. And then usually you're going to have to water stuff. So having access to a hose, it's not too far away. You don't have to drag a hose miles, helps. And then you got to think about convenience. So sometimes we kind of put our garden in the back 40 because, you know, it gets weedy and ugly on one hand. But then you tend to be lazy and it's time to cook and you need a basil leaf, but you don't want to run way out there. So sometimes having it convenient to your kitchen, like a kitchen garden, is actually a good call, and it's visible, and so you keep it weeded and nice. So you may or may not want it to be close by. So you have to kind of think about that. And does it fit the criteria for growing? You know, so sun is kind of important, because if you remember the culinary garden, unfortunately, it was like in between two buildings. It was just so shady. They always had a hard time. That was a good example of needing sun. And then for a lot of you, if you're starting a garden, you might be taking up a piece of lawn. So what are you going to do? Well, it's you know, lawn grass has stolons under the ground. It always wants to come up, and lawn grass tends to be very competitive. You could round it up. You could, of course, dig it out the sod, and that might be what you do with your first square foot garden, so to speak. You're still probably going to have some issues in there. One thing you can do is oculate, and that's a fancy word for, you know, you've left something on your lawn, it turns kind of brown. That's a fancy word for taking something like a tarp or weed mat and laying it out and putting rocks down or whatever to hold the edges and leaving it there. You probably, for something like a perennial grass, like your lawn, you might have to leave it there a couple months to kill everything underneath. But what'll happen is it'll kill everything underneath. It'll get hot, won't have sunlight, and then you'll have a bare spot. And that's also something you can do after you're done with a piece of your garden, is just cover it and let it kill the weeds, or water it first and kill the weeds. We'll talk about a stale seed bed. So you're going to have to figure out how to open up your new ground. Any questions on siting your garden? Everybody good? Transplanting. You know, in Hawaii, we find that transplanting works the best rather than direct seeding for most stuff. We'll talk about what you have to direct seed. But so this is where your potting mix comes in. So get a good commercial potting mix to do your seeds. Garbage in, garbage out. So you want nice, strong seedlings. And this is where you're liquid feeding with Miracle-Gro or using an Osmocote or mixing a little bit of compost in here, but it can't be too heavy. Works well, because you want these seedlings are going to need nutrients right from the get-go. You want a nice, strong seedling. And these seedlings need to be in this, get sun and a little bit of, you know, air, wind as well, so that they're ready to go in your garden. So obviously we have commercial trays, but you don't have to. You can use newspaper around a soup pot, a soup can. You can buy peat pots. You can use eggshells. Just the bigger the plant, you know, like a tomato has to get a little bigger. You're going to need something a little deeper. Something like lettuce, it can be smaller and shallower. And then the thing to keep in mind is it's a small container, so it's going to dry out, especially once the plant starts growing. So you need to remember to water them. And when they get rooted, you do want them to dry a little bit every day just before you're going to plant them, but not get crispy dry. So they're still going to need water. That hardens them up a little bit so they're ready to transplant. So once they get rooted, you want to plant them in the garden. That is my gardening tip. Do not hold in your tray or your pot too long, because what that does, that stunts them. And it takes them a long time to grow out of that. So it's really important that when they're ready to go in, they go straight in the ground. Okay. And also remember these, if you make homemade containers, they need drainage. So you have to have a hole in the bottom. And once again, like let's say you had an egg carton, you might have some kind of, I don't know, cookie tin or plastic thing from Costco to catch the water, you know, put them up on chopsticks or something. So the water, they're not sitting in the water. Okay. So transplants work really well. You'll use less seed. Seed's pretty expensive. So that way you can put one seed per, you also want to have one seed per potting thing. You don't want a lot of competition. So if you know, some seeds are small and you get multiples in there, make sure you thin them as well. So you get a nice, healthy, strong plant.
And there was a question about what is the ratio of compost to soil? And also if you recommend coconut coir, cheaper, more sustainable than peat moss. Yeah,
coconut coir is good. That's a good mix or a good substitute for peat moss. Compost, you know, it's going to depend a little bit how heavy. I probably wouldn't go more than 1 part to 3 parts, and maybe a little bit less than that. Maybe 1 part to 6 parts. You might want a little perlite in there. You know, different companies, like we use commercial mix. Some of the stuff I bought like at Walmart or something is pretty heavy. It's more like a wood-based mix. So yeah, coir would be good because it's got good drainage. But you might need to add a little perlite too, if it seems heavy.
And how do you water these transplants?
you know, it's either a hose with a, you know, a water breaker, you know, just has a stream, you know, a watering can. Yeah. Or if you're have a bench setup with automatic sprinkler, but usually like a sprinkler type of watering. There are some clever ways like this one showing here where, and there's some hydroponic ways where they can be in a tray, but not everything does well that way. Things like lettuce does. But yeah, so you have that double-edged sword. You need drainage, I think, as well as water. So, you know, the other thing I should mention is different things take different amounts of time. So something like a pepper might take 4 to 6 weeks to be big enough to transplant. A tomato might take 3 to 4 weeks. Something like a cucumber is going to take 2 weeks from the time you plant it. It needs to go out in the ground. Lettuce, maybe 3 weeks. And it's ready. You need to put it out in the ground. You can always, if you're not ready, you can always put it in a larger pot. But so some people do that. So there's a million ways to do this. But I think the big trick is getting them, fertilizing them, giving them sun, you know, having them have a little bit of wind. As they get bigger, they'll dry that pot out and it'll harden them up kind of on their own. But don't leave them in that container too long. I will say, like the mix question, that's a good question because it depends a little bit on your compost. We had problems at UHMC trying to make our organic mix, which used compost and blood meal. Blood meal is a good addition to your starter mix, but not too much. You know, if it's too hot, you'll burn the seed. And it's, you know, you have to play with it a little bit to find that perfect mix. We had problems with our own compost. It was just too inconsistent. So we started using, you know, a commercial worm compost for our compost mix, and things came out a lot better. So you're finding that right ratio. And there's some recipes online, but yeah, you have to play with it a little bit. Just don't put too much. Use your mix. Use your regular soil mix. Direct seeding, you can direct seed some of your larger seeded plants like beans, corn, squash. You can also actually transplant those. And I would say that your larger things need to be in a slightly bigger container when you do the transplanting than, say, lettuce or some of your smaller stuff. So that keep that in mind. But you can direct seed those. And then some things you have to direct seed. Carrots. And that's what makes carrots a little bit difficult is they also take about 2 weeks before they emerge. And by then weeds are up. So there's a weeding challenge with carrots. Radish, daikon, those kind of root crops need to be direct seeded. Beets, you can do either way. You can transplant, but you can also direct seed. The reason you can't really transplant a carrot is because you probably damage that initial root, and that's what becomes your carrot. So, let me watch my time here. Okay, irrigation. You know, you can. The advantage of hand watering is you go out and look at your garden. The disadvantage, and you know, if it's not too big, it doesn't take that long. But what you want to make sure is you don't just spray across and you're done. You have to, you know, come back and forth so that let the water penetrate and get kind of down deep. When you're seedling, if you direct seeded or you had little seedlings, you have to water a little more often. But once the plant is established, you want to get the water down there deeply, and you might not have to even water every day. Kahalui in the summer, you're gonna have to water every day, but elsewhere, maybe not with a clay soil. So if you can get it down there deep, but that takes a little more time than you think. So how frequent is going to depend on the weather and your soil. If it's a sandy soil, you're gonna have to water more often. If it's a more clay soil, you can water less frequently and get a deep watering. But you don't want to flood it. So you have to, sometimes you give it water and go to the next plant and then come back. You might have to go back and forth a little bit. That way you get out and look at your garden, but it does take time and sometimes you forget and then that's a disaster. Irrigation setup is best if it's an automatic timer, because sometimes if you just turn it on, you walk away, cook dinner, you forget about it. And there are battery powered timers and different things you can get. You can do sprinklers, like micro sprinklers. Sometimes those setups are really good, little bubblers like here. And then I am a big fan of drip irrigation, but then you sort of need rows. So that might not work in a home garden quite as well as something like sprinklers. So, but water is usually important. If you're in a rainy place, you might get away with not watering too much, but even rainy places, a few days of hot, sunny weather, you may have to hand water. Okay, any questions about water or soil or anything like that before we get into individual vegetables?
Someone asked about, would you water 2 times a day if you could?
You might, if especially if you're hand watering. It's really hard, you know. You can go hand water and then go dig in the soil and see how deep it actually got water, and you might be shocked that it's only gone down a little bit. So you might water twice a day if you have the time. On the other hand, you know, why I always say deep watering if possible. I don't usually water every day, except maybe when you just transplanted, because I want my plants are lazy. If there's water at the top, they're going to have all their roots at the top. If you water deeply enough that there's water down a little deeper, and then you don't water every day, the roots are going to grow down to there, and then they're going to be a little more resilient. So it's going to depend a little bit. You know, a sandy soil where you're hand watering, you might have to water twice a day. And then in your pots, your containers, if it's hot and sunny, you might have to water twice a day. We do in the summer. Yeah. Because they only have a small amount. So the hotter, sunnier, windier it is, the more water the plants suck out of the soil. So yeah, I'll get too deep in the weeds to figure out your timing, but plants need about, in Kaului, plants need about 1.5 inches, 1.4 inches per week of rain, if you will, if you were to equivalent that to rain, which is quite a bit. So yeah, Lahaina is the same thing. Any other questions? And you can see, you know, your plants are wilting, they need water. If your ground is wet and your plants are wilting, you may have a root problem like root knot nematode. So that's another issue. But okay, I thought I'd talk a little bit about some common vegetables, maybe a couple tips. The tomato family, you know, these are probably some of the premier vegetables people want in their garden. Eggplants, there's a gazillion varieties. They take up space, so make sure you give them enough space, because in the home garden, you're going to probably keep them going for quite a long time, because you don't need 1 million eggplants, so they can live up to 2 years. You can prune them back a little bit, and they'll give you eggplant, and then they'll slow down, and then they'll kind of rejuvenate themselves and give you more eggplant. We seem to have better luck when we give them a bamboo stake to kind of hold them up. And so that would be my one tip with eggplant. They will get mites in the summer, which we're going to talk about pests a little later. And whenever you select varieties in Hawaii, you want to look for disease resistance. Like tomatoes, you want to look for something that has nematode resistance. That's one of the downfalls of some of the heirlooms, is they don't have any of that stuff. They don't have that resistance built in, so they can be difficult in the outside to grow. Tomatoes, you have to make a choice. So determinate or indeterminate. Determinate varieties kind of, they don't keep growing. They kind of do their thing, and they produce a lot of fruit, and it's ready kind of in a fairly narrow window. They would be your patio type varieties, are going to be determinates. but even in the garden as well. Indeterminate varieties, they'll keep growing. And so you need to stake them. And you can get them to grow actually fairly tall and for a long time. So you have to make that choice. If you don't intend to stake them, then you want a determinate variety. The other thing about tomatoes in Hawaii is if you're going to grow outside, cherries are the way to go. There are some smaller, you can try the UH varieties, for instance, but the larger fruited tomatoes tend to get tomato fruitworm, as well as a few other pests. And so because they take a long time to go from green to ripe, they tend to get attacked. Cherry tomatoes are small enough that they're not attractive to the tomato fruitworm, and so you tend to get production. So if I'm growing outside, I pretty much stick with cherries or grape tomatoes, the smaller tomatoes. Maybe a smaller aroma. And then staking or trellising. There's also pruning. You want to take the suckers out of the bottom, and you can look that up with tomatoes. That's kind of important.
And somebody was asking, what are the best tomato cages?
There is no best, whatever works for you. Yeah, I mean, so any kind of cage, or you can use a cage, you can, you know, put a post, whatever's easiest for you. I've used them all, you know, they all have their pros and cons. And it depends a little bit on your variety. Yeah. There's different ways to do staking. I mean, so I don't have an answer for that one. Peppers are a little, probably the harder thing to grow of this family. The hot peppers are easier to grow. They don't get attacked by pests so much. So like jalapeno, obviously the Hawaiian chili, they can grow for a long time. What you want to do though is you don't want to plant your bell peppers right next to your sweet peppers. It'll make your bell peppers slightly hot and your hot peppers less hot. So, and sometimes in the home garden, you don't have a choice. So you might separate them by time. You know, you grow bell peppers and you can put your Hawaiian chili pepper off in the corner someplace away from your bell pepper. The other thing is pick a variety that maybe has a less, doesn't take forever to give you bell peppers. Some of the smaller fruited ones are better. We've used Islander and Bianca. And then pick them green. It takes a good month or more to become ripe. And in that amount of time, it's going to get pepper weevil or some problem. So it's very difficult in the outside to do colored peppers. And there's some smaller sweet ones, like we just grew lunchbox peppers that are quite good. They don't give you a huge production, but there's some smaller sweet peppers you might try as well. It's very difficult to grow them to ripe because we have something called pepper weevil that will find them. Any questions on tomatoes? How much time do I don't have much time. Okay, I better keep moving and then we'll take questions at the end. Cucurbits. All I'm going to say, a couple things about cucurbits is look for something that is powdery mildew resistant. Look for that in the description of your variety. And then a bonus, if they're resistant to things like cucumber mosaic virus, any of the mosaic viruses, you'll have a lot better success. To be honest, I've given up growing cucumbers outside because of pickleworm. We always had problems with melon fly. So, but in the home garden, you may have success because you're only growing a couple plants. If nobody's growing around you, you might actually have success. You don't have to trellis cucumbers. Some of the smaller pickling varieties, you grow right on the ground, but you can trellis them so that they grow up. And so the longer fruited ones you want to do. So something like yeah, there's some pretty good long varieties, but they're difficult to grow. Zucchini and summer squash, make sure you give them plenty of space. I would recommend you don't plant yellow varieties. That's my tip to you. The yellow color attracts the melon fly, and and you'll probably have good luck by yourself. I'll talk about melon fly in a little bit. Watermelon, go for the smaller fruited varieties probably, and that you need to grow in the summer. And then kabachas and the winter squashes have a harder shell, so they're a little easier to grow, and look for powdery mildew resistant varieties. Beans are great to grow. Sometimes we have some issues with some pests, but usually in the home garden it's not too bad. Bush, you have a shorter pick, but it's faster. Pole, you have to have a trellis. So do you want to, do you have the ability to put up a trellis, or, bamboo poles in a teepee? You'll pick for a longer period of time. So sometimes it's nice to have a mix of bush and pole beans. And then there's other beans like long beans, wing beans. So beans are a great fit for your garden, and they're great to move around and rotate with your other stuff because they can fix N. You usually have to inoculate them with a bacteria called rhizobium, and the rhizobium bacteria infect the roots and make nodules, and the beans can fix nitrogen. Another easy to grow vegetable is okra. Okra, I didn't grow up, I'm from the north, so I didn't grow up eating okra, but it's actually very tasty. The trick is picking them young. If you pick them every day and you get those young ones, they're actually delicious. Sweet corn, I would try the UH varieties first. And the trick with sweet corn is it has to be grown in like 4 rows at the minimum because of the way it pollinates. So you have to grow, you can't grow one long single row of corn. You can, but you may not have very good pollination and fill in the ear. So aloe is a great vegetable. It's adapted, and you don't need a low-E to grow taro. So, but you do have to fertilize them. That's the trick with taro. Then we have our cooler season vegetables, and some of these vegetables may not do that well at lower elevation in the middle of summer. Those of you in Kula, you're kind of in that sweet zone where you can, in the summer, you can grow all the warm season stuff, and you can also still grow the cool season vegetables. Those of us at lower elevation may struggle a little bit with some of them, and so you want to, maybe you don't do some of them during the summer, but in the winter you have great luck. So lettuce, our own Manoa and Anui Nui lettuces, and they're actually currently some people are trying to breed some newer ones for heat resistance. But for many of us, I always look for heat tolerant varieties. Swiss chard, although it's a cool season vegetable, it seems to tolerate heat fairly well. You can harvest the leaves for a long period of time. Very healthy, spinach is a cool season vegetable, so I don't have a lot of, I've never grown spinach. But so you can use it like spinach, and it's very healthy, and it's in the same family as beets, and then beets usually do fairly well, but they might struggle a little bit in the hottest part of the summer. Crucifers, broccoli, you might get away with. You might not like growing it in Kahului or Lahaina in the summer. So look for heat tolerant varieties. The trick with crucifers, or the difficulty, is there's about 5 moths that lay their eggs. You've all seen that little white butterfly that flies around. Well, it lays its eggs and eats all the leaves. And so you have to control this either by covering them or spraying them with something called BT, which is a natural bacterial-based toxin that only kills caterpillars. But you have to spray them once a week. And you might get away with it 1 or 2 plants in your garden and not have a problem, but you may have that issue. Upcountry, you can get away with cauliflower and cabbage. In the winter, you could maybe grow cauliflower here. Cauliflower is a little more sensitive than, say, broccoli. The Asian greens are oftentimes much more heat tolerant, which is, if you've ever had one of our bags, you always are, you know, I've scaled that back, but we used to always grow, you know, Joy Choy and Bok Choy because they're fairly heat tolerant. Some are Komatsuna, Tatsoi, Kai Choy. UH has a really good Kai Choy if you like the mustard cabbages. It's really tolerant to heat. These also will get the caterpillars though. So there's lots of really cool Asian greens. They tend to be more heat tolerant. Onions, you know, they're not as cool season. The only thing about bulbing onions, they take a long time, so be prepared for 6 months. And make sure they're day length appropriate. So in order to bulb, onions need a certain length of day. And of course, we don't get really long days, so some of the, you know, like a Walla Walla sweet isn't going to give you bulb up here. So we usually use the Texas sweet, the Grano, Gran X types. And then a lot of us grow green onions. UH has a great variety called Koba. And that is one plant. When you plant in your seedling trays, put multiple seeds in and you plant it together. Don't thin that one. So green onions, pretty easy to grow. And then herbs are easy to grow. They need sun. Basil, there's lots of different basils. The thing with basil to keep it going is you always pick, you know, remove the flowers or the branch just below, and then where the leaves are, another node will come out. So you pick down to the next node and it'll keep going. Parsley, that lasts a long time. You pick the outside leaves. Cilantro, you have to do repeated plantings because they bolt and flower. Okay, any questions on vegetables? Individual vegetables, or anybody have a question on a particular vegetable?
There's a question about if the zucchini leaves are a bit yellow and have powdery white spots, do they need fertilizer?
No, they have powdery mildew. And I'm going to show you a picture of that, but since we've asked it, it's the other thing about zucchini, they don't last forever because, you know, we pick them maybe 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes a little longer. And I'll tell you the control for that powdery mildew in a minute is sulfur. But they get so many diseases and, you know, they just have a lifespan and they're done. So they tend to get that as they get older. But I always get powdery mildew resistant or tolerant. They're not perfectly resistant varieties so that they don't get that until near the end of their life. So you have powdery mildew on your zucchini.
And one other thing is they wanted you to share the name of the red cherry tomatoes and white cucumbers that you grow in the CSA bags.
Oh, the white cucumber is called Itachi. Itachi. And the red cherries we grew this semester were called Sakura.
And one other thing is that what do you use for mulching?
Whatever I got. So grass clippings, whatever leaf mulch I have, you know, it's like whatever you can get your hands on. I mean, we've even been so desperate as to use shredded paper from UHMC. It's ugly. It's not really my favorite, but, you know, it's like whatever you can get your hands on. If you don't have any, like I've even bought straw bales from Dell's. They're not that expensive and you get quite a bit, like maybe $15 and you get a half or a quarter bale, I guess it is, and it'll go a long way. So, yeah.
Is there anything you shouldn't mulch?
You know, there is some stuff that's allelotoxic. In other words, it kills weeds. So, you know, I wouldn't necessarily mulch with, well, I guess, yeah, that's a good question. So something like eucalyptus wood chips. In the past, I avoided wood chip mulching because it's so high in carbon, it can suck the nitrogen out of but if you're not going to till it in, wood chips are okay. You may have to, you know, give them that liquid feed because you might have what we call a nitrate depression at the beginning. If you're going to till it in, maybe avoid wood chips or sawdust because it's so high in carbon. So right where you plant your plants, that's why the grass materials are better. I mean, if you've got banana leaves, you know, that kind of stuff is a little better, the greener stuff. But sometimes we have to use things like wood chips. Just be careful about tilling in your wood chips. Great questions. Weeds are, you know, probably the biggest issue in home gardening, commercial gardening. The important thing is you do it early, okay, and maybe often. Letting your weeds get big means you just impacted the yield of your plant, right? So you want to do it early. Over time, if you limit stirring up the soil and you keep mulching and you limit that, you'll get less and less weeds, especially if you're really good about weeding and not letting things go to seed. One thing you can try is what we call still seed bed if you have a lot of weed problems. And that's where maybe you get your soil ready, you water it, and then you kill the weeds that are there, either by oculating, putting a tarp over it for a week or two, or burning it or spraying it, whatever you might do. And then not disturb it and plant right into it. And that way you've sort of got that first flush of weeds out of the way. Mulching, I mean, one of the main reasons we mulch is because weed seeds are tiny and oftentimes and I'm not talking about nutsedge, but even nutsedge is impacted. A lot of times being exposed to light is what gets them going. And so by mulching, you're keeping that, and you got to mulch right away. You transplant, boom, you mulch. And that might keep some of the weed seeds from starting. And even something as tough as nutsedge, you'll have nutsedge, but less of it. And then hand weed is needed. There's lots of cool tools. Having the right tool makes it a little easier. Hand pulling, I mean, there's no magic bullet. You just got to bend over, you know. I mean, everybody wants something I can magically sprinkle fairy dust to get rid of weeds. It's hard. It's just, you got to do the work, okay? You know, and some people in the alleys, you could use cardboard and then put your wood chips over the top of that. That'll be even more impenetrable. There's different tricks. And also, your mulch can't be just a sprinkling of mulch. It's got to be, you know, 1 or 2 inches thick, if possible. Okay. Insects. You know, Hawaii is a difficult place to home garden. If you know, home gardening in Minnesota is a lot easier and a lot more productive. And it's because we have a lot of insect pests from not only the Americas, but also Asia. It's gotten harder in the 30 years I've been here because we've gotten so many other insect pests that we didn't have before. I'll show you some biocontrol animals you want to be aware of just for your landscape and your garden. We mostly always, well, not in the garden, we only use pesticides that are registered for organic production. So BT controls the caterpillars. Azodactrin, which is neem, controls larvae of insects. Pyrethrins, and there's also spinosads, which are kind of expensive, but they're actually quite effective. Mites. In the summer, you're going to have mites. You also might have something that looks like mites or gives the same damage, and that's an insect, but anyway, mites, you can use sulfur, you can use the soaps. The thing about the insecticidal soaps is you have to get them underneath the leaves. If the pest is on the underneath of the leaf, it has to contact the insect. Same thing with any oils. So spraying it on top, but your insect is on the bottom, it's not going to do any good. So you got to get underneath there. And soaps and oils can kind of burn. So you want to do those in the morning or in the evening. And, you know, they really do their job in about a half an hour. So you might need to rinse them off. So if you did it in the evening, you could go out in the morning and rinse it off. so that it doesn't burn your plants. And then the ever problematic fruit flies. For the vegetable garden, melon flies are going to be your problem. They lay their eggs in zucchini and cucumbers and all that good stuff. And there's male traps. The home gardeners can kind of set you up with that, where you take a soda bottle and cut it in half, and you have to go buy the, it's called Q-Lore for melon flies and methyl eugenol for oriental fruit fly. And then there's a bait called GF120, which I'm not sure that's available in small quantities. Basically, it's a molasses with spinosad. You spray it in little drops here and there. You don't spray it like a traditional spray. You just put it around your garden on big broadleaf plants, and they go over there, and the females eat that and die. Slugs are an issue because of rat lungworm. So, you know, commercial slug bait, if you had a raised bed or containers, you can get copper tape that might keep them out, but they can be problematic. And then there's a whole bunch of other ones that are specific to different crops. But one of the things like aphids and a few other things have good biocontrol. And here's just some of the creatures that you might think are horrible, but they're actually, see this big fuzzy thing? It looks like a mealybug, but it actually moves around. That's called a mealybug destroyer. This is the adult. It's a type of lady beetle. So don't smush those. They eat more than mealybugs. They eat green scales and different things. Here's a larva of a lady beetle. You see this kind of creature on your plant? Be happy. They'll eat aphids, scales, different things. There's a whole bunch of different species. These are aphids, but this aphid has been turned into a mummy by a little parasitic wasp. This is a syrphid fly. You might know it as a hoverfly or a sweat bee. The larvae eat aphids by the gazillions. And then this is a lacewing larvae. So there's lots of beneficial insects out there. So one of the main things you want to do in your garden or around your garden is plant flowers, because the adults of these guys, many of them only eat pollen or nectar, and some of them will eat that as a supplement. So things like sweet alyssum, cosmos, even there's parasitic mites, even having some grassy weeds outside of your garden can be helpful for pollen. So there's different things you can do to attract the good insects, and they're very important. Here's your powdery mildew. The good thing about powdery mildew is you can control it. You can use sulfur, which also controls mites, and it's also a nutrient. So that's really, if you start seeing powdery mildew on your zucchini or your cucumbers very early, you want to spray them right away, and you'll extend the life of your plant for a while. There are some soaps that work, insecticidal soaps may work for powdery mildew, something called Calgreen. And then I always look for resistant varieties, things that are tolerant, particularly in the cucurbits. And then viruses, we have a multitude of viruses. You may have encountered banana bunchy top, and you no longer, something easy like bananas is hard to grow now. Viruses, there's no cure. The only thing you can do is get resistant varieties, and if you see your plants get infected, like zucchini has multiple viruses, is to pull it out. Yeah, because if you leave that in there, you're going to cut one zucchini and cut the next one, and you just spread it. So you can't save it. It's a goner. So removal, what we call roguing. I guess that's it. It was kind of a rush through of home gardening.
There's a few questions. If you dig out grass and put in cardboard to kill the area, should you leave the cardboard in and put the dirt on the cardboard to start the garden?
You know, they call that lasagna method. You know, you could do that. Once again, I'm a dirt farmer, so you want to get down to your dirt. What I would do is just pull back the cardboard from where you're actually planting and leave the rest where you walk. And then, you know, you might mulch right on top of that cardboard. And eventually that cardboard's going to break down and add to the organic matter. Some of the no-till growers, they'll put like their compost, then their cardboard, like in the rows, and that helps break down the cardboard. But I would just, you're trying to kill the grass, you put the cardboard, that's going to take a long time because it doesn't get as hot. But I would just pull back where the cardboard is and then put compost in that little spot and, you know, plant your plants and then put another mulch on top of the cardboard and where the plant is, rather than pile on top. But some people do it that way, like if they don't have good soil, but you can make any soil good eventually.
And another question is diatomaceous earth okay?
Oh, diatomaceous earth?
And safe for veggies and herbs?
You could put it like around the plant, but don't get it, and obviously you're gonna wash your vegetables. But yeah, it is. You can, for some of your, you know, that works for, I don't know about putting it on. You could try it, but you gotta make sure you wash it really well. You know, that cuts the insect and slugs, and then they dry out. I've never used it widespread like that. I've used it around vegetables, but I've never put it on my vegetables. So I don't know the answer to that exactly, but you'd want to make sure you wash it. It's like little glass, basically.
One other thing is it safe to spray the garden with cedar or spray around it?
You know, I'm sure spraying around it is fine. If it's not labeled, I'd have to say no, you wouldn't spray it on your plants. You know, it has to be, well, from a legal and safety thing, the label has to say you can apply it on vegetables or you can apply it on cucumbers. And that's my legal answer. And I haven't used something like cedar. You know, you can use some of that kind of stuff in a home garden, and I don't have experience with it because it's way too expensive in a commercial setting. But in a home garden, I'd be a little leery about spraying it on my vegetables, maybe.
And if planting in a 5-gallon bucket, how deep do you plant the seeds, or leave room for the root? Leave room for the roots.
Oh no, you don't plant your seeds. You know, yeah, don't plant your seeds deep. You know, a big seeded thing might be a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. You know, something like a bean. But normally things are about 1/4 inch deep, and then the roots. What happens is the roots go down. You know, some plants can have their roots down many feet. So that's why a 5-gallon bucket is good. But make sure you put plenty of drainage holes in that bucket. So yeah, don't plant your seed any deeper than you would normally.
And I have 2 packets of Nui Nui lettuce, 2 packets of UH long green eggplant, and 1 packet of the Poa Moho dark long eggplant to share. So, and you can decide how you want to share.
Don't make me decide. I don't have a way of doing that. I guess whoever emails Joyce the fastest, who wants it, I can pick it up at the. How are you going to distribute it? Or are you going to mail it, Joyce?
I'm thinking of just mailing it, just because they're so tiny, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I would say whoever emails Joyce the fastest. A Nui Nui lettuce is good. It's like it's a little more like a romaine type sort of. And I know a lot of people love the green eggplant. It's milder. Any other questions? Oh, one other thing. Lettuce. This is what I want to tell everybody. When you plant lettuce seed needs light. Do not bury your lettuce seeds. You need to water your whatever it's in. Water it good, and then make a little indent, I guess, into your transplant soil, and put the lettuce on top, and then mist it. Maybe cover it a little bit so it stays moist. Mist it for a few days, and then water it regularly, because it needs light to germinate. You get really poor germination if you bury lettuce seed. That's my other tip I wanted to share with people. No other questions?
Well, thank you, Anne. This has been
Oh,
really
I went over my
awesome.
time.
And everyone's so appreciative of, you know, you sharing your knowledge today.
Yeah, sorry, it was probably not very detailed, but okay, thank you.